For over 20 years, one of the theme verses of NorthWoods Church has been Ephesians 3:20-21. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Do you believe that God can do more than you ask or think? The story of NorthWoods is not one of people, pastors, land, or buildings, but of a God that can do abundantly more than we expect. Since 2022 is the 20th anniversary of NorthWoods Church, we wanted to capture NorthWoods' story from the perspective of the people that were there. As you hear from these people, we hope you'll be reminded of the greatness of our God. The story of NorthWoods Church actually begins with a satellite church called Touch of Grace. Involved in those early years were Gary and Sally Green.
So guys, where did you go before NorthWoods?
Grace Baptist Church.
Grace Baptist Church. So that was the church that started NorthWoods, essentially. Were you guys around for that discussion?
NorthWoods actually started as a satellite church, which was a totally new concept to Evansville. They started meeting actually in the clubhouse of the Greenbrier apartment complex, I believe it was, on the far east side.
Also involved at that stage, Jeff and Lori Irk.
Mark Hearn was the pastor currently there at Grace. Almost immediately with us attending there as a new young family, he started planting the seed within us if we would be willing to go to a satellite church. And some of the bigger cities had started doing that, but it hadn't migrated down to smaller communities like Evansville.
And so Mark Hearn was the pastor at Grace at the time, and on Sunday mornings he would go out and do like an 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock service at the clubhouse and then drive back across town and do his regular service at Grace.
Another part of the satellite church was Kathy Wellmeyer.
And we would have to set up and tear down every Sunday, and didn't grow too much, but the neat thing about it is we did get Terry and Jeannie McCarty from that ministry, and then they were instrumental in moving us forward and getting Brother Bobby.
Yeah, that was kind of like pre-NorthWoods, right? It was trying to build a campus, and then after trying to build the campus, there was the movement to plant a church.
Right.
The vision was that we wanted to put a church presence on the far east side of Evansville.
And then that folded.
Yeah, so Mark had left to go to Savannah, and Tom Savage was called to be the pastor there at Grace. Tom's vision wasn't the same, and we really weren't growing, to be honest with you. We had stagnated. There weren't new people coming in. And what we did then as a group, we didn't want to just integrate ourselves back into the church. So we stayed together as a Sunday school class. And so us from the Touch of Grace stayed at Grace Baptist as a Sunday school class for several more years until we've got momentum going and we could relaunch what is now today NorthWoods.
Yeah, so the importance of Touch of Grace is eventually that is the nucleus that becomes NorthWoods.
Yeah.
In early 2002, Bobby Pell had successfully planted a church at Greencastle, Indiana, and was listening to God for his next opportunity. Meanwhile, Grace Baptist was planning to launch essentially the same core group from Touch of Grace, this time not as a satellite, but as a church plant to the far east side of Evansville.
At the time, I was the church planter, lead pastor of New Life Baptist Church in Greencastle, Indiana. That church started September the 19th of 1993. I was still in that role. 2002 is when NorthWoods began. Amy and I were convinced that the Lord had us to a place of done, but we did not know what was next. We thought we were going to go to a normal church and I would pastor a normal church. I mean, I'd planted, and so now I'm going to go to a normal church and pastor it. So Dr. Charles Sullivan was the state convention executive director for the State Convention of Baptist Indiana. I communicated to him that I was open to leaving New Life Greencastle. He communicated to me that there was a church, but it was Calvary Baptist Greenfield. He asked if I would be willing to give them my resume. I said, sure. So I did. Then he contacted me later and he said, well, would you be willing to meet with a core group in Evansville who wants to start a church? And I said, no. And then I said, well, wait, it's a core group? Because I know my giftedness in planting is that I can't what's called parachute in. I can't come in and plant alone. I would have to plant with a team. I'd have to plant with others. Because there was a core group, I changed the no to a yes. Amy was good with that. And so 4th of July weekend, 2002, we were traveling through Evansville because I was in Chattanooga for that weekend and stopped by and was interviewed. And it was one of those interviews of, I don't really care what happens in this interview because there's a church that's got my name.
Terry and Jeannie McCarty called us and said, hey, we have a guy coming in view of a call. Would you come listen to him? And we said, sure. So we went to Grace and we listened to Bobby preach. And as soon as we left, we both looked at each other and said, okay, we're ready to go. Let's start this thing. Let's go. So we were very impressed with Bobby in the beginning.
Bobby really had not that he's not this way now, but he was really passionate. You could just hear the passion in his voice when he preached, especially at Grace. He did a great job.
Did your opinion change after going into the interview?
It did. I mean, in the sense of Amy and I, when we left, we said, this was very different than Greencastle in that I come into Greencastle with a vision. This is a situation where the core group has a vision and I'm going to adopt their vision. But it was very adoptable.
Yeah. Reaching north side of Evansville.
Yeah, the northeast side of Evansville, being a church planting church, well, that fit where I wanted to go. All of that made sense to me.
Were you part of the group that interviewed Bobby?
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
I was on the pulpit committee for that.
You were on the pulpit committee that interviewed Bobby. Wow.
We went to Newcastle, the five of us. So the five that I listed. It was just exciting to get to hear Bobby and actually realize that, hey, this may be happening after so many years of waiting and praying for that to happen.
Yeah, so y'all went up to Greencastle and watched him preach.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, and we met with him afterwards. I don't know if it's Arby's or Wendy's or somewhere like that. We wanted to go a little bit out of the mainstream of where his church members would be eating and sit there with his family and got to talk to them a little bit. And
yeah, and his boys would have been real small.
Well, Ryan was a preschooler.
Yeah.
Because I remember having Ryan in preschool when it started.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're really whining and dining the new prospective preacher at Arby's.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what were your first impressions of Bobby?
I was so excited to hear him preach and to just say, wow, this is going to happen. The passion he had, it was just a really great sermon. And then just to meet him afterwards and hear his vision and his excitement for starting a church and his passion for that.
In November of 2002, NorthWoods Church held its first services at the McCutcheonville Volunteer Fire Department Gymnasium. But that particular location presented a number of challenges.
What do you remember about the McCutcheonville Fire Department days?
We were a church in a box. We kept all of our stuff in one of the little enclosed trailers behind the fire station. On Sunday mornings, we got the sound system out, the keyboard out, we set it all up, ran all the cables and the speakers, and we went and got the chairs, brought them in, set them all up. We had our service. We tore it all down and put it away because we only had the building on Sunday mornings. So we were church in a box. Well, I mean, you got to show up early and you got to stay late. And like with every church, big or small, you've got a certain percentage of the people who do most of the work. And our first Sunday, we had 50 people there. And I think about a third of those were people that came down from Greencastle to support Bobby the first week. So we didn't have 50 people. Actually, we had 35 or so and visitors that weren't visitors for NorthWoods. They were visitors just for the day. So yeah, we were small.
Setting up, tearing down, a lot of physical work, but also it was just so exciting to see new families coming in and actually growing even then. It was just exciting time.
I remember the bathrooms smelled awful. They were horrendous bathrooms.
Just kind of it wasn't bad. It just had kind of a different
It stunk,
tone.
especially by the restrooms.
Lori remembers the smell. My nose doesn't work as well as others, so that
It was bad.
didn't seem to bother me, I guess, as much. I don't remember that as much.
I just remember that everything was dark, and when you went to the restroom, it was dark, and it stunk really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely awful bathrooms.
There was only one classroom in that building that was available to us.
It was the nursery,
So
preschool.
it was the nursery, preschool, and then the other Sunday school classes took place where we could find room. I remember one Sunday sitting with the youth group on the stairwell next to the stage. We literally met in the stairwell for a Sunday school class that day.
I remember that there were these silver streamers coming off of the stage that if you would have walked in, you would have thought we were a charismatic church. I have no idea why the McCutcheonville Volunteer Fire Department had those streamers up there on that stage.
Mm-hmm.
But they did. They had these silver streamers, and they were always up there. And you can still see those if you look at past pictures.
When they sang, they were on the stage, so they were above you. Everything was above us.
And Kathy Wilmar was the first worship person.
Bobby said, okay, who's going to do the music?
Mm-hmm.
And Ruth Hughes volunteered me. And I'm like, really? But that was when God really stretched me and got me out of my comfort zone, because I really never imagined doing that. So the process of that was picking a song every Sunday and then listen to a CD. That's all we had was CDs, and writing down the words, backing up and writing down the words the way it was exactly on the CD, and then typing it on a PowerPoint program that Terry McCarty created for me. My two boys, one was a senior and one was an 8th grader. And so every once in a while we would have live music, and sometimes they would pull their friends in, and so we'd have a live band, and that made it less structured. We could kind of have a little bit more flexibility with our music then, because we didn't have to go exactly how the CD was going to be.
But I'm very grateful for all those years of that. McCutcheonville Volunteer Fire Department was good for us. We had 52 people our first service. We started running around 40, but at the end of year 1, we were running 80.
And then y'all went to what they call the Tupperware building.
That's correct. Yeah, they sewed Tupperware out of the back of the building. I think there was also somewhat of a union hall in the back of the building.
The Tupperware building, it's not the official name of the building, but in Evansville, Tupperware ran out of that building for years and years and years. So it became known as the Tupperware building all over Evansville. So
It was an event center, a smaller event center.
That's the one that Bobby said was a dance hall.
You know, we met in a reception hall space. I had a dance floor. I preached on that dance floor every week. Some weeks when we would first get there for setup and tear down, there was a kegger that would be out there right next to the dance floor, and we'd have to move the kegger off to the side and cover it up. There were some unique things about that.
one of my distinct memories of that building is we had a beer tap under a cover on the side of the room. It wasn't ours, but
Right.
It was a dance hall. So I never forget, we would set up for church on Sunday mornings, and at the side of the room we used for the auditorium was a beer tap with a cover over it.
Again, we set everything up, tore everything down every week. I do remember a keg that was there that had to be usually moved or was kind of in the back. So you had that.
Deb Behringer stepped in and took over the music part right before we got to the Tupperware building. So what I remember about that was her starting a choir, and that was really awesome to do that. Still a lot of tear down, set up. It was still not a permanent building. So we did a lot of the similar things, but it's just a little bit better of a facility.
If you looked at the building, it was much nicer than the McCutcheonville Volunteer Fire Department. But to be honest, we really didn't grow there. The thing that had going against it was you couldn't find it. It was in an industrial park. The only way you'd find us was somebody had to tell you.
Realizing the Tupperware building location was not actually conducive to growth, the NorthWoods family soon moved again.
We bought a church building on Oak Hill Road, which is known as Church Road. And that little church, we went into that running 80 people and soon ran 180. And we had to go to 2 services. That little church was a huge blessing to us. It was almost as if when we got into there, people started recognizing you're in a church building and we believe you're going to exist.
It was a woohoo moment because we didn't have to set up and tear down every week. That was just so labor intensive. We immediately started, I know, with 2 services there because the sanctuary, even though it was nice, it just didn't have the space for the number of people that were attending. So immediately we started, what I remember, started with 2 services and the church just continued to grow.
That was one of the times when we really were growing because it was a church. I mean, it was an actual building and we could invite people and say, hey, this is, I don't know, just the atmosphere of an actual church. And the physical part of tearing down and storing things away, everything was there. We could leave it there. We could leave the toys out for the nursery. We could leave all that.
And so grateful. There was a lot of wisdom in buying that building. We were able to buy it pretty cheap. Grace Baptist Church, who started our church, in their forethought had given us about 57 acres of land, something like that we had to pay off the last little bit of debt. It was like $50,000. We did that in our first year, but we determined while we were in that church building that we bought that we wanted to sell it. That property was out on 57 near 69. We wanted to be back where there were houses. And so we sold it. We paid off the debt on that little church building, bought the property we're currently on, and had about $100,000 left over to start building for the future.
NorthWoods began to build a new church facility on Green River Road in 2007. The construction of the new facility was marked by the generosity of many who jumped on board to the dream of God's growing church.
If I wasn't at the fire station, I tried to be here every day on the job site. But we had a group of volunteers, Carpenters for Christ is their name. And they travel all over the country. Every summer they would take vacation from their jobs. Some of them were retired, but most of them still had jobs. They took their vacation. They paid their own way up here. We provided them a place to stay, and we fed them twice a day. Other than that, they covered all their expenses. And they were going to come in and do a week-long building blitz for us. Problem was, they had never built a building with walls as tall as our building. Midwest Contracting was our general contractor, and so Tim Cook got his guys and then a group of our volunteers, and we laid the footers, we poured the foundation, roughed in all the plumbing and electric, and we erected the 4 walls. When the Carpenters for Christ were coming in, we were going on vacation. We left on a Friday, there were 4 walls standing here. When we came home the next weekend, the building was here.
Wow.
1 week, the building was here.
That's a miracle.
Yeah.
Yes.
We weren't here to see it, but they said it was like an army of ants. They brought, I think, 140 people with them. We had probably at least a half a dozen smaller mission groups that came and helped us for a week or a few days or whatever. And then, like I say, we had just a group of our own people.
Oh, I have some fond memories of that. Saturdays were work days, so that was volunteer. So just really anybody would come, and then you would just be assigned what you would do. My husband has construction background, so he was used a lot because he knew how to do a lot of that stuff. And I just felt like I was more his apprentice and bringing him materials or whatever. I can remember being up in the rafters and holding ductwork for my husband. I had a huge appreciation for his ability. I'd never really seen him at work, so to see the hard work that he did. So I can even remember one time when Bobby was saying, we need some help up here on the roof doing something with the shingles. I'm like, I'm going to do this. So I climbed up on the roof and I don't know what, unwrapped shingles or something for the actual roofers, but people would just try to help when they could.
I'm very grateful for Tim Cook. I'm very grateful for Don Cisco. I'm very grateful for Gary Green. I'm very grateful for many of the volunteers who put in many, many long hours. I am not a builder. I'm not a construction guy. My responsibility back then was to coordinate the volunteer groups who come in town. So we had Carpenters for Christ who came from Talladega, Alabama. They stayed at Castle High School, and they came back and forth from Castle High School. I think they were here a week. And then we also had the Mississippi Nail Benders who came from Mississippi, and a smaller crew, but they came and also assisted in building our facility. And then we also had New Providence Baptist Church from Loudon, Tennessee, and New Providence Baptist Church hung almost all the drywall here. I was the coordinator of where would they stay, how would we feed them. I did that thing. I didn't do a lot of construction, which people are very grateful for. I'm pretty confident of.
I remember hanging upside down on the roof. It was a hot summer day, and I was wearing blue jeans and work boots, and I went to step over the hole in the roof, and my pants stuck to my leg, and my leg didn't go as far as I wanted it to, and I fell in the hole.
Oh, no.
It flipped me around, and I was laying upside down on the roof with my knees down, dangling inside the hole. That's what caught me and kept me from going off the roof.
The building was finally completed, and NorthWoods continued to grow. As it grew, its staff also grew, and many great staff members such as Jason Harris, Ed Collins, Andrew Crow, Bryce Palmer, Chris Holtzmeyer, Nate Van Cleve, and Marvin Wilson ministered to the church body over the years. However, one staff member had a special story marked by God's amazing grace: Nathan Schroer.
Probably what I remember most about Nathan was just his passion for Christ. And I always enjoyed watching him when he played the guitar in the praise band. He was so animated. You could not watch him play the guitar and not be uplifted. He was just so happy to be up there, and I don't know if I've seen...
He was worshiping by himself. Yeah. He didn't care who was around him. I mean, it was an awesome experience to watch him.
Brian Turpin's a direct result of Nathan Schroer's work.
Yeah.
You know, Brian would not be where he is today in the ministry if it hadn't been for his relationship with Nathan. And Brian's pastoring a church now.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Brian Turpin was one of those most touched by Nathan, and it's quite the story, so we'll just let him tell it.
How did you meet Nathan Schroer?
He was on the Evansville Police Department in narcotics, and I was in sex crimes at that time, and so I didn't know him until I worked the case that resulted in him adopting his son. I was lost at that time. I didn't know Jesus. I was working in a really dark unit. I wound up getting a call one day. It was from a social worker at a hospital here in town, and a 12-year-old girl came into the hospital with a medical emergency. They didn't know what was wrong with her, but they quickly found out that she was in labor. And this girl has a story that doesn't ring true to the social worker, that she's pregnant by a boy her age, but she couldn't give very good details or anything. And I went in and talked to the 12-year-old, and she told me that the guy that posed as the dad was the uncle. He had raped her. The whole family knew, but they wanted to protect him. Didn't want anything to do with the baby that was born. They weren't going to take it home. They didn't want anything to do with it. That really bothered me. Just a brokenness in that entire situation, and in the people that worked in my unit at that time, it really hit me. And I thought that I should get out of that unit, and prayed that, God, if you're real, let me know. I mean, I need you to show me, or I'm transferring out of this unit. I know that sounds stupid, giving God an ultimatum, but that was my prayer. I hadn't prayed since I was a kid, and I prayed that. An auto theft detective that I worked with on the street is trying to have a conversation with me, and I was giving very short answers. She finally said, "What's the matter with you?" I told her the story. There's a baby nobody wants. I know what the system looks like, and this baby's getting ready to be released into that system, and it's not pretty. So she just listened. So I go back to my desk. Unbeknownst to me, Nathan Schroer is sitting across the hall from that office. She comes over, and she just throws all kinds of heat at him, saying, "I hear that you're trying to find a baby halfway around the world, and you got one right under your nose, and you're not even doing anything about it." I get back to my desk and he calls me. I don't know. All I knew, he was a youth pastor at that time. And he said, I hear you got a baby nobody wants. And I said, yeah. And he said, that's my baby. That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. And I said, I don't think so. And he said, no, it's ours. We've been praying. We got a lot of people praying for us to have a baby. I'm sterile. I can't have a baby because of my chemo and my stem cell transplant. I've talked to my wife, and this is our baby. And I was thinking of the guys that I work with that said the baby didn't matter because of its color. And I say, it's a black baby. And there's this long pause, and I promise you, I swear that I thought that I was going to hear a click and him hang up. And instead I heard him just say, it's a baby, right? So I connected him with the family. Whenever I had prayed that prayer for God to be real, it was on a Wednesday. So that Friday, I'm sitting at my desk. It was due to be released soon, but that Friday, I got off at 4, and I stayed at my desk and just hoping something would come in that would show me that God was real. Because Nathan, that whole deal was an afterthought. That's not going to work out, right? I mean, that's impossible. 4:30 comes, and I start praying, and I start crying, and my phone rings at my desk, and it's Nathan Schroer. And Nathan said, he's ours. He's ours. I'm still crying. I'm trying to tell him everything that's going on in my life. And he says, hey, I've got to go. We don't even have a car seat. And, I got to go. He hangs up. A year later, he replaces one of those people in my unit. He becomes my best friend. We did ministry together. We did vacations together. There's just a lot of really cool stuff. I still miss him. I think one of the coolest parts about Nathan was he was always looking at how to serve better. Over and over again, he would lament the fact when he was sick that he couldn't be a part of worship. He couldn't be a part of connecting with the people here.
It was Nathan's second battle with leukemia that finally brought the Turpins to NorthWoods Church.
I had been at the hospital with Nathan shortly before Good Friday of 2013. He was really, really down. My wife called, and Shanna asked me, how's he doing? And Lindsay was in the room, and I put him on speakerphone. I said, I'll let him answer that. And he said, hi, Shanna. And she said, how are you? He wasn't in a good place. None of the treatment was working at that point. He said, I'm dying slowly. Lindsay got upset and walked out of the room, and Shanna tried to say some stuff, and she said, if you get well, when you get well, we will be there for the first sermon you preach with an eye on joining. He got released pretty much on hospice in May, then started going into remissions. The leukemia started going away, and we kept praying for that. Then he got to the point where there was zero leukemia, and he was healthy, and he came back to work. And then the first Sunday in July, if I remember right, we showed up, and he didn't know. He was preaching that day. He didn't know that we were coming. And the first thing he said when he saw us, he smiled, hugged us, said, what are you guys doing here? And Shanna said, do you remember our promise? And he said, yeah, but I didn't think you really meant it.
What do you remember about Nathan Schroer?
I remember his strong testimony from being a secular, worldly person to just being a man of God. He was a great leader for the youth. He was on the praise team. I just really appreciate all the things that he was able to do.
And he was very influential with our youth. The kids just loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He discipled our son when he was having some rough times, and he was very good to him then and helped him through some rough times. So Nathan is truly missed.
One of the things that I just always really appreciated about him is we had a lot of lunches. At those lunches, we just enjoyed each other. That has nothing to do with the legacy of Nathan at NorthWoods Church, other than I miss him. I loved him. And I miss him.
In 2015, NorthWoods began a significant Wednesday night ministry to kids and students. Here's, at the time, family pastor Matt Higgins.
I had done Awana at a previous church. Awana is a great family ministry program where parents are involved in teaching their kids about the gospel. It's also a great, fun program, and the kids really enjoy it. What I knew about that program is it just takes a lot of people to run that program. And at a previous church, we enjoyed the Awana program, but we had to shut the program down because we just didn't have enough people to do it. As I started to meet people in the church, I started to see that God is just showing me that we already have a lot of personnel in place to actually do kids ministry. And so we gathered all these people together. I remember the first night that we met, it was me and my wife and the Greenbanks and the Millers and then the Kings. We didn't have to do a ton of training people in terms of what Awana was about because we had those people here already. We launched pretty quickly, and pretty quickly God really blessed it that we had just a ton of kids that were here on Wednesday night.
The first week, I think we had 75 people, kids and workers.
Before COVID, it was getting to the point where we probably close to 140, 150 kids here on Wednesday night between our Awana ministry, our student ministry that was also on Wednesday night.
We had to stop some of our Wednesday night programs for the adults because we needed them to work in Awanas.
Right.
And that's a great problem to have.
Volunteering at Awana, those kids, man, I mean, seeing the light bulbs come on, not only memorizing the verses, but them being able to accurately tell you what that verse means. And that was really a big deal.
Here's Women's and Student Ministry Director Rachel Bland.
I think one of the cool parts of working with our students over the years is just being able to see how they have cared for one another, from sharing the gospel to each other to loving each other and praying for one another through different prayer events, or even sometimes we don't even have a prayer event, they just do it.
NorthWoods is the first place where I've had a student surrender seriously to ministry to the point where they went to seminary. And that was amazing to be a part of that. And I'm thankful for Joe Terry being able to lead him to Christ and for him being a part of that, honoring the Lord and serving, and now being in seminary. It's amazing to be a part of that.
In 2017, NorthWoods began its support of international missions with its first trip to Ecuador. By God's grace, this began, to say the least, a robust missions program.
Well, before I got to NorthWoods, I had done some Ecuador mission work with Dave Wilson. Dave was, when I was at a previous church, he was head of the Highland Lakes Baptist Campground and involved in Ecuador missions then, but eventually he became a full-time missionary. He and I were friends, had served in Ecuador together on short-term missions. He recruited a team from NorthWoods, and looking back on that trip was absolutely magical. I mean, it was almost like the perfect mission trip. There are just amazing ways that the Lord impacted our church based on that first mission trip. And really, we got the missions bug from going to Ecuador.
Here's Diane Edwards, who's gone on more than one missions trip with NorthWoods.
Well, I've been fortunate enough to go on 2 Ecuador trips. I think the greatest thing that I remember about going to Ecuador was sitting in that little church and trying to sing the songs that they were singing, although I didn't know the words, but knowing that we were all singing to the same God and we were all praying to the same God.
Here's discipleship pastor Darren Garton.
I got to go on a mission trip with my son to Ecuador to share that experience with him of one, being in another place and working together to share the gospel. For me, it was very memorable. We have some pictures in the mountains of Ecuador at the base of a waterfall in Ecuador. The mission trip that I took with my wife to Ecuador, for us to experience that, sharing the gospel together, our church sending us out as missionaries, I think that is one of the great memories that I have of worshiping with believers there and sharing the gospel there.
When we would walk down the streets, we were taller than 80% of the people there. And then we just stick out really hardcore because our skin doesn't match like the majority of the people. So another funny memory from Ecuador was the amount of times that I got engaged or proposed to by a mom for their son. Also very interesting in the sense of, do you have a boyfriend back in the United States? And just trying to communicate even in those moments, hey, I'm actually not looking for love on this trip, but let me tell you about the greatest love that you can ever experience.
Probably one of the things that I'll never forget, on our first trip, we were able to go to an orphanage. These kids were very happy, played and got along with one another. They didn't have much. And it made me realize when I got home, I had a little talk with my grandson, who was 8 at the time. These kids, for a snack that day, they got an orange slice where they separated an orange, and they each got a quarter of an orange. And they were so grateful for that.
One of the things that I really appreciated about Ecuador is just, I really have a heart for evangelism. I love sharing the gospel. And so being able to do it so much, so frequently, just really sharpened that ability and desire within me.
Now, I think missions is really an integral part of NorthWoods. This is a crazy statistic that I don't have an exact number. So at least a quarter of the NorthWoods church population has served on a mission trip somewhere.
The congregation was supposed to have given $90,000 to missions last year, and they gave $185,000. And we're not even talking about this year yet.
Right.
And when that happens by the end of the year,
crazy.
Paul Chitwood, who is the president of the International Mission Board, he's leading our missions conference this year. You're talking about the person who leads Southern Baptist international mission efforts of sending thousands of missionaries on an annual basis. Okay. In Southern Baptist circles, he is probably number 2 name in Southern Baptist circles. And some would say number 1 name. He's leading our missions conference this year. Absolutely crazy.
By God's grace, NorthWoods has had quite an impact over the years on many lives. And so we asked some of our interviewees their favorite memory from their time at NorthWoods.
My biggest memory of NorthWoods, I think, will always be in August of 2007. It was a Sunday morning, and during the invitation, Sally and Katie and Ben went down to the altar to pray. And while we were there, Brother Bobby stopped the invitation that day, and the entire congregation gathered around us and laid hands on me and prayed. And they were praying for healing because I had just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And 3 days later, I was at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis to have a surgery to remove the cancer. It's a really intense surgery, and they took me to the operating room, and when they opened me up, they biopsied the tumor one more time before they did the procedure, and the cancer was gone.
Wow.
He still has the tumor, but there's no cancer.
And God healed me, and that's the only way to look at it. It'll be 15 years this August.
Well, I guess my early days, whenever I was actually leading in worship, because that was something that my boys and I shared. I look at my boys now, and they both lead in their own churches in music, in their worship. So that was pretty neat.
I remember really some of the Good Friday services and some of the Christmas Eve services that are just really special. Those are some of the memories that I remember.
I really enjoy the sweet fellowship we have here.
Honestly, my favorite times here at NorthWoods have not been here on campus. My favorite times have been spent at Crossings Camp. That is usually our summer tradition outside of COVID to take the students to Crossings Camp during the summer. And the Lord has just done so many amazing things during Crossings Camp. And there have been nights of Crossings Camp where all of our students are just broken by what the Lord is really doing in their hearts and in their lives.
I have a billion photos on my phone. So I think one of the fun things is just scrolling through and thinking through all of the different memories that have happened, from farts in a can with some of our students.
Fart in a Pringles can.
So all of our students who are listening will totally know what that's about. Just some really funny memories that are there that are fun, but at the same time, you get to see these life transformation memories that are happening with students and women and people in our church. And then it's just this really exciting thing.
When I was first here about 3 weeks in, I was doing announcements. It was the first times that I had done that here, and the steps were very small. As I was going on stage, like the third week that I was here at NorthWoods, I tripped, and I was in a thing where I had a pinched nerve in my neck. Well, I tripped and fell going up to do the announcements, and when I went to grab myself, my arms didn't come out, so I fell all the way to my face on the floor, which would not have been that noticeable, but I got to the podium and it made me laugh, and I was trying to say, it's like I'm drunk, but all that was heard on the microphone was, I'm drunk. So my kids thought that was the greatest thing. They showed that video to their friends over and over.
There are lots of answers I could give to that. Getting out of the McCutcheonville Volunteer Fire Department, smelly bathrooms. But the truth is probably some of my favorite memories are things like baptizing Jerry DeWig, who was Vicki Warren's mom, and she was probably late 70s, early 80s, 90 pounds soaking wet, seeing her publicly proclaim Jesus. On a Sunday morning, communicating in a message the gospel, and before the invitation begins, Bill May standing down front and looking at Bill while standing and immediately knowing he's there to come to know Jesus, and then being able to do his funeral a year or two later. The largest memories I have are seeing people's lives changed. I don't know how long I'll be here, but however long I am here, I want to be able to look back and see lives changed.
Our daughter met her husband here. I have lots of memories, but probably my best memory of NorthWoods still happens every Sunday. When I look down the pew and see my wife and my kids and their families and my grandkids all sitting on the row together at church.
It's a blessing.
We've got 3 generations sitting there together, and that's special.
We also asked our interviewees how NorthWoods has helped them grow.
Now, I cannot tell you how my life has changed, the impact that this church, this ministry has had on me in my walk with the Lord. I walk closer with Him now than I ever have. I share the gospel, which I never used to do, and realize how easy it is to do. I've been able to do mission trips and do jail ministry and Bible studies, and I've been able to do discipleships with other women. And it's just amazing how He can use you if you just surrender to Him and ask Him to show you where He needs you and what He wants you to do.
For me, I would say it's helped me grow through the love and support that the church provides to everybody. I truly feel, you feel that here, and the power of prayer, as I shared with the story I just told. I mean, I'm a walking miracle.
I get asked all the time, how are you? What's going on? The ministers and their families are all very easy to talk to. It just always helps me out.
I was going through a divorce whenever I met Brother Bobby, and so I was pretty broken at the time and really didn't know how God was going to use me. Through encouragement and just feeling God's presence in how I was doing this and walking me through this, I really felt like I grew a lot in my faith. Just thinking, hey, you're using me. I can't believe this. This is really happening.
When you lean on other believers and you pray together, God really moves.
For me personally, the spiritual growth, I think, comes through the feeding or the giving of the word. And again, I think we've got a staff here that does an awesome job of presenting God's word.
When I started coming to NorthWoods, I was really hurt and struggling a lot with just what God wanted from me. I felt like God had given me these gifts and abilities to minister to His people, and yet I felt like my gifts were being put in a box. God allowed me to be healed in the process of all of that here, where it was like, you might be hurt, but I want to show you that your worth is not in what people think about you. Your worth is not in your ability to do something. Your worth is only found in me because of the finished work of Jesus. I also think that I had this weird thing happening inside of me where I felt super abnormal when I started coming to NorthWoods. NorthWoods provided a family of people who all had the same vision, which was the Great Commission, and still is, to make disciples who make disciples. And God used the leadership of our church to help grow me into who God has me being right now. And y'all still are used in that capacity to shape me into who God wants me to be in the future.
It's been significant to me to be tasked with the idea of discipleship. I realize when I'm in discipleship with other people, I'm better at growing in my relationship with the Lord, trying to cultivate my own personal times with the Lord, growing because I'm doing a curriculum with other people, memorizing scripture because I have other people that I'm going to memorize scripture with. And that scripture shapes me into the image of Christ and helps me to try to be a good example in my home with my wife and my family and so forth.
When I was in college, my first year, I was a music minor. And I really had aspirations to do something with music as a career. And then I had to retry out for the show choir, and through a weird set of circumstances, I flunked the audition. I really had no choice but to drop out of the music program. And that was a huge wound to me, that music was not what the Lord was going to let me do. To now have the opportunity to do music, it's a tremendous gift from God. My prayer is I never lose the wonder of what a gift it is that here at NorthWoods that God has given me the desire of my heart, which is to use these gifts that He's given me to give Him glory.
If I couldn't do this job when I first started, it's more so now. With more experience doesn't mean there's more confidence, especially when a church has grown. I don't know how I present myself to people, but I know how I feel inside. I don't feel as if I always have the answers. I think one of the things that God has done in my life through NorthWoods is just to help me rely on Him.
I guess my hope and prayer for NorthWoods is that NorthWoods will always be here, and that we'll continue to grow and minister, and that God will be pleased with what we're doing.
I pray that NorthWoods continues to seek God's will and reach people for Christ.
Yeah, I want to see us grow spiritually. I mean, I think that's the most important thing.
Right.
Is that as a congregation that we continue to move in obedience to what God has for us as individuals, but also being obedient to His Word and recognizing the sin that's within our own hearts and confessing and turning from that.
That it will continue to grow and share the love of God.
I would love for it to be normal for people to constantly be thinking, who should I invest in? Not that that's something that the pastors do or that's something that the small group leaders do or something else, but for me to be thinking God could lay somebody on my heart that I'm going to get involved with, and we're going to eat lunch together once a week, or we're going to have a breakfast together periodically, whatever that is. And God's going to be using me as a part of growing somebody else. And then that person grows somebody else.
I just want more of God, more people pursuing Him, more people coming to know Him, more people sharing His gospel, more people having new ideas, coming on board, more people joining the Great Commission. I just want to see God do more.
I think, speaking as the worship pastor, I think my hope and prayer for NorthWoods is we would just have vibrant worship. We would never take for granted what a beautiful opportunity it is to worship a glorious God. And I just want us to have exciting, vibrant worship that demonstrates that we are not people who are dead in our graves. We are people who are alive, have been raised, and I want to worship like people filled with joy because we are alive.
I desire us to grow at 9920 North Green River Road. I desire us to plant churches. I desire us to make disciples all across the world in every people group. That's not changing. Want to see us grow right here? Want to see us plant churches? I want to see us make disciples all across the world. How is that possible? Ephesians chapter 3. Now unto him who's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think according to the power that's at work in us. That's how he is able to do something we can't do, but God can. And then when he does it, verse 21, Ephesians 3 says, to him be glory in the church. So when he does it, may he receive the glory for it. We're not going to turn around one day and say, oh, look at what we've done for the last 20 years. To God be the glory, great things he has done. To God be the glory for every person who's drawn near to Christ, for every person who's begun to follow him. God's done more than I have expected, and yet I know that God can do more. I know that's a little weird, but had you told me 20 years ago some of the facts that I now know about what's going on here at NorthWoods, I'd say that's not me. That's God.
As NorthWoods Church turns 20, we are reminded that God is not done with NorthWoods. God is still in the business of doing far more than we can ever think or imagine.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods!
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods Church.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy anniversary number 20, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods.
Happy 20th anniversary, NorthWoods Church.